I think you may have your own experiences here, but I wonder, first of all, what's your reaction to the fact nurses are going on strike and midwives may follow them?
Well, you used the phrase winter of discontent earlier on. I think that it's pretty significant that nurses are, for the first time in the long history of the Royal College of Nursing, taking strike action. For a very long time, there's been a kind of, I think nurses have felt that they can't take this kind of industrial action because unlike rail workers or unlike, I don't know, bin men, nurses are held as in a different kind of work. They get, obviously they give a particular level of care. And I think that sort of almost blackmails them into not being able to do what they need to do to get fair wages and decent working conditions in what is essentially a job and is as difficult, if not more difficult, than other jobs. And so even though there's been a lot of criticism because obviously disruption in a hospital or in a GP surgery is going to have very different consequences than it might if you were shutting down a supermarket or something, I think that, given the current climate and the fact that even we all know that wages with inflation aren't exactly meeting people's needs, I think it's right to support this strike action, and I say fair play to them.
But Ella, would you feel that way if it was perhaps your mother or an aged relative whose hospital appointment was cancelled, or perhaps, worse still, died alone because there was no nurse on the ward?
Well, this is why I talked about, the idea of blackmail, which is that any strike action has some kind of disruption. That is why you take strike action, in order to disrupt the normal working
but Ella,
process.
I'm asking you how you would feel if it was your mother or your father. Perhaps they weren't given medicine they were required because the nurse is on strike. Maybe they died alone because there was nobody in the ward to be with them. How would you feel about that? Would you still support the strike, do you think?
Anyone in that situation would feel terrible, in the same way that, when railways were shut down by strike action, nobody was going around saying, isn't it great that I missed my train? That's the nature of strike action, that it's supposed to be disruptive. It's supposed to have consequences. That's the way in which you send a message to your employer that your work as an employee, as a labourer in whatever field it is worth fighting for. And that's how you fight for better wages. Now, you mentioned that I have my own experience. I mean, I've got my baby here in my arms. You might not be able to see him. He's been quiet at the moment. A month ago, he was born in a London hospital, and the level of care I got in that hospital was shockingly bad. It was a really poor experience. And we know that there have been several scandals. Luckily, I have my son in my arms now, but there are lots of women who didn't get to go home with their children. We've heard about the East Kent maternity scandals in Shrewsbury and Telford. And there's a lot going on there to sort of unpick that we don't have time for today. But one thing that's very clear is that staffing levels in hospitals, particularly among midwives and nurses, is very poor, is very low. So what you have is people, often women, who are being pushed to the limit, doing 12, 14, 16, even more longer shifts on pay packets of, 27,000, 30,000, who aren't able to give the level of care that they're meant to, who aren't able to do the job to the right standard. And so, you might say, I would feel terrible if my mother missed her hospital appointment because of strike action. But the state of the NHS at the moment is so poor that it's probably comparable, the two situations. And that's what the Royal College of Nursing is saying, is that at the moment, staff are not able to give the right level of care because there aren't enough of them, because they're not being paid enough, and that it's having dangerous consequences. So in that context, I think, what else are we expecting staff in hospital to do?
Well, if I could ask you just briefly, Ella, you said the service you had when you had your baby was shocking. If midwives go on strike, there's going to be no service at all.
But to counter
but it's
that
not
argument,
that's what's going to happen.
Well, I don't know what you want me to say in terms of that. I've already explained. I think everybody watching knows what happens when strike action is called. Disruption happens. That's why you go on strike. I don't know how many times I can spell that out.